Very good morning from the Military Literature and Cultural Festival Foundation, Lucknow, to the 11th session of Military Literature Festival, Lucknow. A very warm welcome to our esteemed panelists. Today's session, Buoyant Sino-Pak Collusivity, is courtesy Strive. Strive is a premier and emerging think tank from Lucknow, and this is our collaborative effort. I now hand you over to General Chakravarti for conducting today's proceedings. Thank you. Ajay sir, over to you.
Thank you, HK. It was very kind of you to have introduced us. Esteemed speakers, Chairman, Military Lit Fest Foundation, Lucknow, General HK Singh, participants of the webinar, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. On behalf of our Chairman, General A.B. Parmar, and Team Strive, my own self, I welcome you all to today's webinar, Buoyant Sino-Pak Relations, Implications for India, being organized by the Strive in collaboration with Military Lit Fest Foundation, Lucknow. I'm joined by the other members of the Team Strive in conveying our sincere thanks to team of the Military Lit Fest, Lucknow, for considering us worthy of taking up the current subject for the deliberations. I would also like to assure General HK and his team that we, the Team Strive, could be banked for any such future collaborations. We are also highly thankful to the distinguished speakers who, despite their very busy schedule, have kindly consented to share their vast knowledge and wisdom with the audience on the subject. Here I would like to inform that Dr. Tara Kartha is indisposed as is in hospital. On behalf of all of us, I wish her speedy recovery. I'm thankful to my colleague, Major General Harsha Kakkad, to have risen to the occasion, and he'll take on Indo-Pak relations. A very special thanks to Brigadier Rumel Daya, who has very graciously agreed to share his wisdom, on Indo-Pak relations. What about the Strive? We are a think tank run by the veterans, dedicated to research and deliberate on issues related to national security and nation building. In pursuit to our objective, we have identified this current topic. Pakistan, despite having been defeated in all past conflicts with India, it still harbors the wish to wrest Kashmir from India by engineering internal dissension within Kashmir in particular and India in general. However, they are also well aware that with their current economic strength and the major power differential with India, her dream is likely not to see the light of the day. The current geostrategic equations are also not very favorable to them, and for them to indulge in any kind of misadventure will be at their own peril. That is why for the last few decades, they have been investing in their relationship with China, with whom India has adversarial relations due to boundary disputes. Over the years, the relationship between Pakistan and China has grown up in such a way that the geostrategic as well as economic interests of the two countries complement each other. Unfortunately, the strengthening of this relationship is becoming a major source of concern for India in more than one ways. In this connection, China is smarting under the jolt they got last year during the border standoff appears to have not been able to reconcile to a resurgent India. Both China and Pakistan feel that the flight of US from Afghanistan has created a new strategic void in the region, and this development, in their appreciation, has become a rude shock to India. This is partially true also, and India will have to come out with a strategy to deal with this growing geostrategic challenge on her own. I'm sure the speakers of today's webinar will be able to recommend a cogent strategy for India to cope with emerging challenges to her national security. Over to General Dushyant for further conduct of the webinar.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, General HK, for having given the opportunity to Strive India to collaborate with Military Lit Festival Lucknow for conduct of this webinar. It's a matter of honor for Strive India to contribute to the laudable initiative. I dare say Lucknow is limited in its security experts community, and this initiative will go a long way in encouraging the people to think security as far as the Lucknow and the UP larger UP crowd is concerned. In fact, we are highly honored to have amongst us some of the leading national and defense security experts to speak on a subject which may appear common given its familiarity. In fact, everybody in India considers himself or herself as an expert on China and Pakistani matters. But the topic has assumed a greater importance given the recent Talibani resurgence and taking over of the government in Afghanistan. What impact will it have on the emerging China-Pakistan collusivity is a question which we need to answer very carefully, given the spate of targeted killings which Pakistan is resorting to, given the fact that China is intransient in its border talks. It has not been agreeing to the proposals which the Indian side has been proposing, given the fact that there are reports that there are Pakistani officers who are deployed opposite Tibet for conduct of WTC operations, given the fact that Pakistan is reorientating itself and its terror groups in form of renaming them to get them over the FATF constraints, such as renaming the LET and the JEM workers as the resistance force, etc. The targeted killings in Bangladesh. I think also the China-Bhutan agreement, which has recently taken place on the border issue. These are some of the issues which are of a great concern as far as the Indian national security is concerned. And I'm sure this panel, which is possibly working in the field of security for the last, I think, 15 years, as I know about, would be able to throw light on various issues. The future of SAARC, how will the BIMSTEC go forward? With Afghanistan now being ruled by Taliban, will Afghanistan be part of SAARC? SAARC as such is defunct. What is going to happen to it? So to throw some light on these questions, we are indeed fortunate to have amongst us Brigadier Rumel Dahiya, who has been a mentor of officers like me who have joined after him, and Mr. Vikram Singh, who is a former police officer, DGP of UP police, as also, as they say, Murphy's law always kicks in, and Jan Chaturvedi had just highlighted, Tara is taken ill very seriously today morning, and she has been admitted to the hospital. And we have Jan Harsha Kakkar, who is going to elaborate and dwell on the Pakistani angle as far as this webinar is concerned. So before I invite, let me introduce Brigadier Rumel Dahiya to our audience so that we are aware as to who is addressing us. He served as the Deputy Director General at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, which is now Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi, from 2011 to 2016. He is an Indian Army veteran with extensive command and staff experience spanning over 3 decades, including as a military diplomat in strategic affairs and in counterinsurgency operations. He served as India's defense attaché to Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, and with the Indian military training team in Bhutan. He also served with Military Operations Directorate of the Indian Army and the Net Assessment Directorate of Headquarter Integrated Defense Staff. In short, we call it as IDS. Brigadier Dahiya is a graduate of the NDC, New Delhi Defense Services Staff College, is widely traveled and has interacted with many global think tanks. He was awarded the Sword of Honor and Gold Medal at the Indian Military Academy at his commissioning. He's also been awarded with the Sena Medal for Distinguished Services. We couldn't have asked for a better person than him to speak on this likely approach of China in the short to long term, suggest measures to deal with the security challenges posed by China from such a collusive threat. So without taking any more time, sir, over to you, sir, Brigadier Dahiya.
Thank you. Thank you, General Dushyant. Thanks, Strive India, and thanks, Lucknow Military Festival Organization. Thanks, and my dear friends, Jal Chaturvedi, Hemant, and Ramesh, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you and share my views. I think it will be in order first to recount as to how this collusive threat has evolved, how this developed right from the beginning. You see, at the time of India's independence, and in the light of Asian solidarity that was being propagated by our political leadership, India China relations were better than China Pakistan relations. And Pakistan India relations, of course, were bedeviled with host of problems right from the day of independence. So, what happened to change this equation then? In fact, the 1962 war between India and China changed this dynamics. This gave an opportunity to Pakistan to fish in troubled waters, to exploit China's differences with India to its advantage. And immediately thereafter, they started making noise. In fact, Ayub Khan told the American ambassador in Karachi at that time that if America is ready to intercede on behalf of Pakistan and ask India to make some concessions on Kashmir, then Pakistan will not side with China. And he clearly declined, flatly declined to send a message of reassurance to Pandit Nehru to say that it will not, interfere in this or not coming to this conflict. He refused to do that. So obviously, this thought about balancing India existed in Pakistan from earlier days. But immediately after 1962 war, they moved in quickly to reassure China of their friendship, which till then had two problems. One problem was that Pakistan had joined Western Alliance, and obviously the Western Alliance was against the communists, and China was part of the Russian system. So there was a need for Pakistan to then rebalance. Secondly, Pakistan realized that sooner or later, India being a bigger country, is going to be superior to China, Pakistan in military sphere as well as other spheres. So therefore, it is good to, have China on its side. Immediately thereafter, they moved to, of course, sign the boundary deal. But very soon in 1965, the reality dawned on them that it's not all hunky-dory. They can't simply go and marry up with them. When Ayub Khan went to China, which also became a pattern subsequently for all the Pakistani leaders, that in case of any difficulty, they should visit China first and there, before and after. So when he went there and asked for help during the 1965 war, then the Chinese Foreign Minister Li Fang and the Prime Minister, Prime Minister Chow En-lai, told Field Marshal Ayub Khan that Pakistan must continue to fight and wage a guerrilla war against India, even if one or two big cities are lost. And if necessary, they should recede to the mountains to continue waging a guerrilla war. Ayub Khan saw the kind of the lack of commitment on China's part, hesitation on China's part to help Pakistan, came back and immediately declared ceasefire, or offered to declare ceasefire. Now, the similar thing happened in 1971 when Bhutto went there in the month of November and asked for assurances. When Kissinger at the same time was egging on China to make some move, but China refused to make that move. And China simply told them that we will continue applying pressure on India till as long as possible. China, of course, had helped in raising of two infantry divisions for Pakistan, had supplied quite a lot of stuff directly to East Pakistan, and also given $100 million worth of aid. Plus, it has interceded on behalf of Pakistan in the United Nations and got a ceasefire agreement, which was not unfavorable to Pakistan. It was, in fact, bailing out Pakistan. But despite that, these actions showed that there were limits to this cooperation. And these limits were further, they came about further during 1999 when Musharraf went to China and Nawaz Sharif went to China. China curtly told them to start negotiations with India in the spirit of Lahore Agreement and also withdraw and also sort of respect the sanctity of the line of control. We must also remember that even after the parliament attack, Zhu Rongji, the Prime Minister of China, came visiting India soon thereafter. And China also, for a change, lifted its veto at the United Nations Security Council in naming Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jamaat-ul-Dawa as part of proscribed sort of entities. Although, of course, they still continue to block Hamid Gul's being nomination as a terrorist supporter. Now, this shows the limit up to which China has gone. But where it has gone, let us see that. China started arming Pakistan very seriously in 60s only. And it was in 65 that Bhutto started talking to China about help in nuclearizing the relationship. It took many years before, it took 10 odd years before China agreed to start delivering sort of help in nuclear field. And we must all appreciate one thing, that whereas normal equipping by way of providing conventional weapons, etc., giving economic aid, etc., is a very strong element of the relationship. But when somebody gives strategic weapons to a country, that is the ultimate test of friendship and trust that one can show. And that is what actually has, to an extent, helped Pakistan to survive as a nation, that it has not disintegrated, and has also given it some kind of autonomy and ability to continue proxy war against India. So therefore, China, in the ultimate analysis, has provided Pakistan with tools with which it can defend itself. But was it acting actually in an altruistic manner? Of course not. There is no doubt that what China has done for Pakistan is much greater than what Pakistan could have done. So when some Chinese expert was asked as to why so, he said, look, we don't expect Pakistan to do anything more than what it naturally does. That is good enough for us. And what was that good enough? You see, China initially considered India as a competitor. And that was also the reason why they were trying to put down Pandit Nehru all the time. And probably one of the major reasons why they went to war with India in 1962. But subsequently, after the opening of Chinese economy in 1978, and the gap that opened between India and China, a very wide gap economically, and concomitantly the gap in military spending, military preparedness, in the diplomatic heft, etc., made China disdainful of India. And they always called India as someone who is a pretender and who's trying to show that it can fit in big boots, but it is nowhere close to China, and it will never be able to come. Now, certain events happened which changed that perception, and the biggest of that was the nuclear tests of 1998. China was shocked out of its wits. And also, that was subsequently when India's economy also started growing up. Then China started taking very serious note of India. So as a result of which, the nuclear help, the missile help in missile field, like M11 came first, and then came M9, and M9, 30 odd boxes, crates of M9 missiles were there at the Sargodha airfield for many days, which were filmed by Americans and everybody else. That happened, and subsequently they gave them 5,000 ring magnets. And when in 1982, when Ziaul Haq told Deng Xiaoping that our nuclear enrichment plan is going slow, so that's the time when hundreds of kilograms of highly enriched uranium ingots were supplied directly on Deng Xiaoping's orders to Pakistan to speed up its nuclear weapons preparation. And in 1990, when the Pakistani nuclear bomb was tested at Lucknow by the Chinese. So all this showed that China had all along continued doing it, continued supporting Pakistan. Sometimes they were in cahoots with America. America had been old friends with Pakistan, and at least two periods which were very, very crucial, in which China and America both leaned in favor of Pakistan were. First is during 1971, that is when uh, Pakistan midwifed improvement of relationship between Pakistan and China. It is, you remember, when Henry Kissinger complained of stomach ache and went incommunicado for 24 hours. And that's the time when he was taken in a Pakistan International Airlines flight to Beijing for talk with Zhou Enlai. And subsequently Nixon's visit took place and all that. And America always rewarded Pakistan for that, for giving them an opening. That was one period. Second period was when China-Russia relations themselves were very strained, and America and China combined together to break up Soviet Union by starting the war in Afghanistan for pushing out Soviet Union from Afghanistan. That was another time when these two countries were together. Of course, this was punctuated by many other periods, like in 1990s, when this export of M9 and M11 missiles were detected. And besides that, America had got many intelligence inputs which they shared with the Pakistanis and which they shared with the Chinese as to how various Chinese firms were trying to procure equipment for Pakistan's strategic weapons program, even from other countries like Russia. They were shared with China. And when China continued helping Pakistan, that is the time when America imposed sanctions, and those sanctions had started at the time of Tiananmen Square. China was in doghouse. Everybody was against China at that time, but China still continued to support Pakistan. Now, so therefore, there is something in this relationship that has been enduring, despite some people calling it the most paradoxical kind of a relationship. It's not an alliance, but deeper than an alliance, deeper than most alliances. Because even in formal alliances, people don't share nuclear technology with others, nuclear weapon designs with others, nuclear testing with others, and strategic weapon, other ballistic missiles with others. But here they have done that. It is also paradoxical because the value systems of the two countries don't match. The political systems of the two countries don't match. Pakistanis see West and the Middle East as their reference point. Pakistanis don't see China as a reference point for their culture, for their society, for the economy, or for anything like that. But despite that, this has been going on. So let us see, what does Pakistan get out of this relationship? Well, for Pakistan, in true sense, it's a matter of survival. Pakistan sees in China a long-term ally for its economic and strategic well-being, geopolitical well-being. Pakistan also knows that China is the last point of call for them when everybody else has ditched them. When America distanced themselves from Pakistan after 65 war, China came to their rescue. When Pakistan was again in doghouse after the Soviet Union's withdrawal, and after it came under sanctions, China came to its halt. When Saudi Arabia started distancing itself recently, China came to its halt. So it is that. Pakistan also sees China as a tool to manage India, to say a more powerful friend. So therefore, to manage India, China's friendship is necessary. And it's, of course, it also sees it as a constant source of supply of weapons, arms, weapons, technology, and financial aid. And what does China see this? To my mind, there are many things that China looks at Pakistan for which it is rewarding it. One, of course, is it thinks that its restive Western China, particularly Xinjiang, becomes more manageable if Pakistan is stable, and if Uyghurs do not get any support from the terrorist elements operating from Pakistani soil. They also want to, in a way, leverage the Pakistani intelligence's entry into the networks. All jihadi networks everywhere in the world has a Pakistani connection and in connection with Pakistani intelligence. China wants to leverage that instead of instead of being angry about it, instead of being sort of being resentful about it, China simply wants to leverage that. For example, many of us know that uh, Mullah Omar, the elusive Taliban leader, the only foreign ambassador with whom he met was a Chinese ambassador, whose meeting was facilitated by ISI in Quetta. Similarly, in many other times, with other terrorist groups, Pakistanis have facilitated the meeting of the Chinese sort of diplomats and intelligence officers in Pakistan. And in any case, as far as Uyghurs are concerned, I think they have done enough. It's the Pakistanis who killed the ETIM leader Masoom there. In fact, sometimes America has helped in Chinese wittingly or unwittingly in dealing with Uyghurs. Abdul Haq al-Turkestani and Abdul Sakur, both who came into the leadership of ETIM after Basmoon was killed, were killed by American drones. So, in a way, America and China have also collaborated in it. And many a time when American support was flagging back, Chinese encouraged them to go and support and give more weapons and give more financial aid to Pakistan. And when China was holding back, that this time America encouraged them to do so. But coming back to the point as to what China looks for in China, what kind of help does it require from Pakistan? One, like I said, managing its internal security threats by way of controlling Uyghurs. Now, Pakistani government has been trying to tackle Uyghurs all right. But as far as the ecosystem of terrorism in Pakistan and Afghanistan is concerned, they have been a little more receptive of Uyghurs. Not because they have their heart into confronting China, or that they want them to start taking action in Xinjiang, but simply because they get more working hands, they get more jihadis in the ranks. So it is that way. Otherwise, if you see, whether it be Jamaat Ulema Islam, whether it's Fazlul Haq, whether it is Jamaat Islami, or any other sort of religious leaders in Pakistan, all of them have privileged good relationship with China over their sympathy for their co-religionists. In fact, amongst the causes, popular causes in Pakistan, support for Uyghurs in Xinjiang comes very, very low. And in any of the maps of the caliphate that you see, you don't find mention of Eastern Turkmenistan, Turkestan or Xinjiang at all. So therefore, Pakistan has helped China in managing this internal threat. Number two, Pakistan also has given an opening to China, to Islamic world. Now remember, I know it for certain and with personal experience that it was Pakistan which brought in Turkey and China together. To the extent that China started sending lakhs of tourists, specifically with direct flights to Turkey. It gave them the A-88 rocket for testing in there, and I know I interacted with some people who were part of this testing, and 7 Pakistani officers also there, living in a hotel next to my house, where I happened to interact with them. So they brought them together, and in 2009, after a series of incidents in China in which the Uyghurs were supposed to have been involved, including in Beijing, in the Forbidden City, where they killed 9 people. In Kunming, they killed about 32 people in stabbing, etc. And 15 odd Hans were killed in Urumqi itself. At that time, Erdogan, as Prime Minister of Turkey, has said, this is a genocide. And China can never be excused and all that. Pakistan interceded on behalf of China, and after 2 years, same Turkey sent its president Abdullah Gül to Urumqi to make conciliatory noises and all that. So Pakistan has been useful for China in opening up to the Islamic world and to sort of intercede on behalf of it as far as this image and its perceptions are concerned. Third, going forward, as China has always thought that it has a Malacca dilemma, as you know. In order to overcome the Malacca dilemma, and opening to Gwadar, opening to the Arabian Sea coast was an important consideration for them. And as China is now, China's ambitions have risen and it wants to be a world power. Opening to the two oceans, that's the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, becomes an imperative.
Hello?
So a Pakistan which is ready to provide its sea coast for Chinese naval activities, which a former ambassador of China to India had said that Pakistani coast, including Gwadar, Ormara, and Karachi, will certainly be a major staging post for Chinese Navy whenever it intends to go deeper into Indian Ocean, to Mediterranean, or to Persian Gulf. So therefore, that consideration, although officially when they talk about it, they always say that Gwadar is a civilian port. Gwadar will never become a military port and all that. But from all actions of theirs, it is turning out to be a military port. And in the next couple of years, we will see this as a formal military post for Pakistan. Please remember, all the equipment that Pakistan gives to the China gives to Pakistan, including Type 039 AIP equipped submarines, Type 054 frigates. It's MQ-16, MQ-7, and MQ-9 sort of air-to-air missiles, which are derivatives from Tomahawk, which Pakistan had collected from Balochistan after 1998 Kenya, Tanzania, American embassy attacks by Al Qaeda. And when Al Qaeda was attacked in Pakistan, so one of the missiles, Tomahawk, had fallen down in Balochistan, which Pakistan took it, gave it to China, shared it with China, and they reverse engineered it, and those are available now in both the countries. So even that. So all these things that have been happening just go to show that uh, this Makran coast of Pakistan will be a very, very important staging post for Chinese naval forces as China now grows to become a world power. Fourth, of course, the surplus capital and the factories, etc., that they're dismantling in China for the reasons of pollution, etc., environmental concerns. Pakistan is available for relocating those. Pakistan, if CPEC succeeds, that also becomes a model for China's BRI to impress other countries that they should also benefit from it and all that. But the most important factor, which actually has provided a glue to this relationship, is balancing of India, which is in interest of both the countries. The very fact that Pakistan has received nuclear weapons and strategic missiles from them, it simply goes to show that balancing India is the thing, is the name of the game. Two quotes come to my mind. One was the Chinese intelligence chief, General Gong Kai, when he was discussing with his American counterparts in Washington. He terms and they questioned him as to why they were supporting Pakistan against India in a manner they were doing. He said, Pakistan is China's Israel. It could be sarcastic comment, but more importantly suggests the kind of importance they give to Pakistan being strong enough to resist India, so that it can tie down Indian forces over there. It can distract its political, diplomatic, and strategic energy, which, if unleashed, can be used against China to balance China. So, as long as Pakistan manages to, make India waste its energies on the Western front, it helps China growth. That glue, I think, is the strongest glue. The second quote is from a Pakistani commentator called Azazuddin. He writes for the Dawn many a time. Many of you must have heard. A couple of years back, he made a statement which I recollect, in which he said, Pakistan loves China for what it can do for them. And China loves Pakistan irrespective of what it does to itself, which means that China's expectations from Pakistan are not great as long as it can fulfill that one basic thing, basic requirement of balancing India, managing India. All other things are negotiable. All other things can be done away with. And that is why my friend Professor Sumit Ganguly has called Pakistan as the principal strategic surrogate of China. Chinese, when they look at their friendships, you see, in the ultimate analysis, and if China has to grow big, and recently what has happened is that many younger scholars, younger commentators and analysts in China have now started paying more attention to Pakistan, and they are Pakistan specialists now. So, as far as they are concerned, their recommendations to their governments frequently, that I come across many of their readings suggest that as China is going to be a global power, China should not shy away from balance of power games. China should not shy away from acknowledging rivalry with India and supporting Pakistan openly. So they are saying that. And this, I think, the Chinese government has taken that seriously. It is because of this that China is no more concerned about India's sensitivities when it provides any help to Pakistan, and when it goes and makes statements which are blatantly false, and it does not really think twice before making those statements against India, be it about Kashmir, be it about anything else. So therefore, this kind of deep relationship, which is basically focused on India or brought about by common rivalry towards India, is likely to sustain. But are there any downsides to this relationship? I think yes, there are. The first downside is this. You see, China would like Pakistan to be less terrorist friendly. Though it has helped China in controlling Uyghurs, but still, the ecosystem, as long as the ecosystem contains, that situation can change. And if divergences between China and Pakistan on the issues of CPEC, when China starts taking back loans and Pakistan's economy is stretched, and that can metamorphose into a kind of a dissonance supported by the religious elements, then the situation about Uyghurs can also change. So therefore, China wants this to happen, but Pakistan is not letting go of that addiction of nurturing jihadis. So that is one. Secondly, even between India and Pakistan, the relationship between India and Pakistan, China would want it to be more predictable relationship. China would probably want that there should be a managed mistrust between the two countries, which America and others can manage, even these two countries can manage, and that there should be some kind of an economic activity between China and between Pakistan and India, so that Pakistan's economy doesn't become the burden only for China to lift. So it would want that to happen, but that's also not happening. Pakistan is intractably opposed to India, and it will never make peace with India, because it thinks that if it makes peace with India, then the rationale for its security policies being on top of every other policy it does not remain valid, and so therefore it's not going to do that. China is also worried that conventional or full-scale war between between Pakistan and India, would entail Pakistan flaunting its nuclear weapons and deploying them. And that's the time probably the jihadis can get hold of them. And that will be a nightmare for everybody. So therefore, there is a downside to the relationship. And that is why in most of these crisis situations between India and Pakistan, China has not only advised moderation to Pakistan itself bilaterally, but has also, with the help of America and all, have both been trying to influence both the countries to exercise moderation. So the couple of things that stand out is this relationship is more important to Pakistan for its survival, but it's very useful for China as well in managing rivalry with India. And as we know, that no country can become a superpower without being a hegemon or the unchallenged leader in its own region. And India being the only potential rival who can manage China's hegemony in Asia India is the only country with that kind of potential. The temporary dip in economic activity notwithstanding, I think there are all tools in place, and I am personally hopeful that India's economy will take off from now on. And with the kind of adjustments that we are making in our geopolitical and geostrategic connections, like Quad, for example, these are our own methods of balancing out China also, and these will become much more important. China today, when it looks at its friends, North Korea is an embarrassment as a friend. As far as other countries like Iran are concerned, they are in the doghouse themselves, and China doesn't have very strong relationship with them in any case. Cambodia, etc., being part of ASEAN, are also not reliable. The only reliable friend so far is Pakistan, who is offering its help and all that. So this will continue. This relationship will continue. Let's be sure. Then, how are these countries going to behave now? How is Pakistan going to behave, and how is China going to behave? I think I'll leave this how Pakistan is expected to behave and how to deal with it to General Kakkar. I'll confine myself to speaking only about China as to how China is going to behave and how do we manage China in this.
Maybe also request, sir, to conclude, so the other two speakers are also there. So
Yes, give me 2 minutes, please.
yeah, no, you can take 5 minutes. Sir. That's fine.
So give me 2 minutes, please. So what has happened is that as far as China is concerned, China seems to have decided that India's relationship with India is irretrievable. India has crossed over to the other side. So the possibilities of only cooperative relationship or partnership with India is over. India has understood China's game, that while they talk softly about India and they sometimes flatter India, but their trajectory has always been to balance India, to confine India to the subcontinent. India has understood that, so India is also talking talking rhetorically, but India is taking solid steps to conserve its interests, to safeguard its interests. So China is expected to do everything that is to discomfort India, to dissuade India from going whole hog, to compete with India not only in Southeast Asia, which China considers as its area of influence, legitimate area of influence, but also will try and undermine India in South Asia, which it has been doing earlier, but now do it with greater force. China will continue supporting Pakistan in every possible way, not only financially, economically, but also in weapons transfer. Newer drones will come there. The cyber and space cooperation will definitely be there. New like AIP sort of submarines are coming, so those submarines will change the naval scenario to an extent. When Iran comes out of the JCPOA deadlock, then one can expect China to really start taking more interest in Chabahar, to sign long-term energy deals with Iran, basically to firm up an alliance against India. Whether that will succeed or not, I don't know. But please expect China to always be difficult with India. Friendship with China will remain a chimera, will never come about. I think rest of the things will take over in question and answer session. And thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, sir, for having given a very detailed perspective on the China-Pak collusivity as it affects India. As you said, greater than the Himalayas, friendship amongst many things is the desire to balance India as far as China-Pakistan collusivity is concerned. I think that's the primary motivator for the two to remain together. With that, we will leave rest of the deliberations to the question answer sessions. And I now come to the next and very, very extremely important part of our today's deliberation, the impact on internal security, because I am of the firm view that internal security is as important as the external security situation for any interruption-free development of a country. But before I invite Mr. Vikram to actually give his talk, allow me to introduce him very briefly. Although he needs no major introduction as far as the security community is concerned. Former officer of the Indian Police Service, 1974 batch, former DGP Uttar Pradesh, largest police force in the world, 190,000, which is larger than the strength of the Indian Air Force, was under his command. Is one of the most highly decorated police officers in the country. He finds his name in the Limca Book of Awards for being the highest, most number of awards being given to a police officer, and mostly, most of them are actually gallantry awards. He directly worked for the modernization and induction of state-of-the-art technology and universal best practices to make police effective and people friendly. I would like to inform Mr. Vikram that I was also part of this initiative as IG Operations NSG during the period of Plan 1, Plan 2, which was happening in the MHA. And I wrote the perspective paper for that. He's also rated as a star trainer and a speaker on issues related to security, man management, crisis resolution, team building, values, and ethics. So he also belongs to the community of General Chaturvedi, myself, General Harsha Karkad of defense management. We were all three instructors in HR. He completed his MSc from Allahabad University in 1972 and PhD from Kumaon University in 1990. He's currently the Chancellor of Noida International University. He has been guest speaker at over 50 prestigious national, international institutions, as well as highly valued and reputed multinational organizations. He's also a TED speaker on how youth can emerge as winners and innovations leading to the evolution of policing. He also has a number of publications to his credit, some important ones being Ecosystem of Central Himalayas, Human Rights and Police, for which he was given the National Award presented by National Human Rights Commission, New Delhi, Chambal Dacoits, Baghis or Bandits, and ISIS, the Black Canopy of Mental Slaughter. I think this is something which will be of great interest to people like me who are studying gray zone of late recently. As if this was not enough, he has been awarded on multiple occasions, as I said earlier, for gallantry, 4 times for gallantry awards, President's Medal, President's Police Medal, and also distinguished awards for long meritorious service medal and Kathin Seva medal. Ladies and gentlemen, we could not have asked for a better person to speak on the likely impact on the internal dimensions with the impact in J&K, hinterland, Northeast, law and order situation in India. Will there be serious inroads in India of AQIS and ISIS? It's a question which I think we will expect some answers from him. Will it attempt to recreate an Indian Mujahideen type of a grouping once again in the country? I think we need to wait and watch and see. Over to you, Dr. Vikram, for your deliberations, please. May I request the organizer to kindly
unmute Dr. Vikram? Thank you, sir. Now I'm unmuted. God bless you, sir. Thank you so much for your very kind and elaborate introduction, General Dushyan Singh, sir, General Hemant, sir, General Chaturvedi, sir, and of course, a very vibrant and a forceful speaker, Brigadier Dahiya, sir. I thank you ever so much for giving me this great platform to share my ideas, and I will speak on the basis of my first-hand experience and the interaction that I have had with the law enforcement agencies and my personal experience of handling ISI operatives, those arrested, and also those who fell into our net, not only in Uttar Pradesh, but in the country. Now, this axis of evil, this association, and I would add, when I say Pakistan and China, I would also include the Taliban in that. And when I include the Taliban, there is a host of other elements, ISIS, Khorasan, and other outfits that would come. I will also like to share how and in what manner can we ban these organizations or to handle them. There is always a best way of doing everything. Now, this axis of evil, I would go back, say, about 12 months or maybe 18 months and take you back to the CAA, anti-CAA agitations, the role of the PFI, the Delhi riots, The role of people like Sharzil Imam, etc., who exhorted people to block the Siliguri corridor so as to cut Assam from India. May I submit that the role of the PFI was very clear, that they organized 120 crores for the CA agitations, and not only this, they also managed to get 50 crores for the Bangalore riots. The Delhi riots, which happened immediately in the backdrop of Donald Trump's visit, and I was privy to the fact that the police commissioner of Delhi invited a few of us and explained how insidious the planning was and what were the modus operandi of the rioters. Indeed, it is fortuitous and lucky that we had the better of them, but it was a touch and go affair like the Chinese would like to do. They are very smart people. They are very smart people. They like to use our systems, our laws, our institutions to their advantage. This was one agitation, both the CAA and the Delhi riots, that the agitators used Constitution of India and the picture and placards of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, and also our tricolor, to give the impression that this agitation is being done by nationalists. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Nothing could be farther from the truth. It's a different matter that the game was exposed. But what remains to be done even today? Why have we not been able to nail the PFI? Why have we not been able to ban this outfit till now? We'll go, what are the problems in banning such organizations and what are the consequences? You see, the left-wing extremism, at one point of time, a national security advisor said that the left-wing extremism is responsible and is impacted 40% of our landmass. And if that be the case, what is it that we are doing? There seems to be no direct connection between the Chinese and the left-wing extremism as of now. But the role of the ISI is very clear. And if ISI is there, can the Chinese be far behind? We know for sure that the Chinese are behind their guerrilla tactics, their strikes, their ambush techniques, because the footprints are very similar. Their blasts and the technology that they use against the paramilitary forces and against our forces are very similar. The repeated use, revolution begins from the barrel of the gun. The first quote from Chairman Mao. We are also aware that the Delhi journalist Rajiv Sharma was arrested in September 2020 for passing on sensitive military information and was paid by Chinese spies via Hawala. This is an open knowledge. Let us go also to Indo-Nepal borders. We have a border of 1,770 kilometers right across Indo-Nepal border. We are fully aware that it is a porous border and used as a favorite access for smuggling of narcotics, weapons, human trafficking, and fake Indian currency. Fake Indian currency would require another session. I'll just complete in 2 sentences of fake Indian currency. The machinery of a security press of Nasik after auction was picked up by Abdul Karim Telegi and shipped to Pakistan. The Bahawalpur has a printing press that is state of the art. They get the same dyes and the ink from Germany, which we use for ourselves. And fake Indian currency is almost as good as ours. Now, the Habib Bank of Pakistan and the Rashtriya Bank of Nepal, they have teamed to create what is known as the Himalayan Bank. Right across the whole of Indo-Nepal border, there is a host. There are series of Himalayan banks. Nothing bad about it, but there's something unnatural about it. The demographic changes, the unusual presence of the Himalayan Bank there, the proxy of which is the Habib Bank of Pakistan, to facilitate what? To facilitate exchange, storage of fake Indian currency. And we also have tried very hard to facilitate this. I'll give you a small example. A cashier of State Bank of India near the Gorakhpur area, Nautanwa, is there for the last 7 years. He has the reputation of being a Babaji, a very frugal man. But in the guise of being frugal, that man against all norms was there for 7 years. was exchanging fake Indian currency and exchanging with genuine Indian currency, and had 3 palatial houses in Lucknow and 2 mistresses in Lucknow. This goes to show what level of internal vigilance and what kind of internal intelligence we have on the lumpen and the criminal elements amongst ourselves. This was a wake-up call, and I wish that we had woken up earlier. And it's not the question of just one cashier. There are multiple cashiers who are facilitating human trafficking, drugs, weapons, and fake Indian currency. Post Galwan and post Afghanistan, I think things have changed drastically. Of course, we have seen how things, and we'll go into that when I do the control strategies. But there was an outfit by the name of Al Badr. This used to be very, very active about 25, 30 years ago, but went into hibernation because the ISI propped up Lashkar-e-Toiba, and most of the drone sightings and the drone droppings are attributed to Lashkar-e-Toiba. Hizbul Mujahideen, and after the Lashkar-e-Toiba and Hizbul Mujahideen, Al Badr is seen to be trained by the Pakistan ISI and alarmingly by the Chinese officers. The ISI and Chinese officers are training Al Badr ranks and cadres, and they have been given very many weapon systems. Fortified bunkers are being constructed by the Chinese, and training also is being imparted by the Chinese military officers. China is using the air base in POK, that is Skardu, which is in the Gilgit-Baltistan area, and it seems to have logistically and has greater military importance than the Tibetan airports in Chinese control, that is Gargunsa and Hotan, because the Skardu airport would provide 30% more payload, and 40 J-10 aircrafts have been sighted there, as also IL-78, which are capable of mid-air refueling. The partnership does not end here. The partnership goes to, in the diplomatic area, where China has brazenly and shamelessly supported the cause of Azhar Masood, a designated terrorist in the United Nations, not once, but multiple times. By record, it is estimated that there are no fewer than 40 sleeper cells that are operational in J&K. It is also known, when we come to the drugs and the narcotics, 84% of the world opium production is from Afghanistan, and the Taliban and the ISI are behind it. Pakistan, in any case, is a failed state, in whose, if the presidential mansion is let out for rent to generate revenue, if the president sells off the gift of a watch that he received by way of a gift for $1 million in Dubai, it speaks volumes about the stature of that failed and a rogue state. Under these circumstances, it should not come as a surprise that Pakistan ISI is behind the 84% of the opium trade that Afghanistan is generating. The arrest of 19-year-old Ali Babar Patra in Kashmir also has given voluminous information as to where we stand and what we need to do and what the course correction would require. Of course, time is less. I will conclude in the next 5-7 minutes with your permission, sir. Pir Panjal is again, the south of Pir Panjal is again an area of extreme concern, because 35% of our studies and analysis pertained to Kashmir Valley. But we must also realize that 35% of the incidents post 1990 have also happened in this area. And the hunt for militias in the Mendhar area, where 9 soldiers were martyred recently, also happens to be here. This area also is the focus of the drone droppings, etc., and the sightings. Probably a lot of supporters there. And if this area has to be contained, it has to be area domination enforced. Then the 3 factors that would require extreme importance and indulgence would be the geography, the terrain, and the demography. Under these circumstances, we have seen that what are the sensitive areas? What would be the requirement of area domination? What would be the technological upgradation? The recent impact that we have seen, that the ISI now has a 5-point charter to do in the next 90 days in India. The first is disrupt air services by infiltrating into the ATCs with their operatives, putting a pen drive into our systems and creating a mayhem as far as IT services are concerned, leading to air crashes maybe. Then targeted killing, as we have seen in Kashmir just now and in the Punjab maybe about 6 months ago, so as to create a communal divide, a sense of panic. Breach rail road transport, I really don't know why, but Bihar seems to be the focal point of such attacks, because in their agenda, Bihar is a priority, probably to cut off east and the west and the north and the south. The power station and the power grids, again by cyber attacks with China's help. And also, if the power stations and the power disruption is there, it will impact IT services, the telecom services, the industrial production as also. And last but not the least, the fifth point is targeted assassinations of RSS and BJP cadres, leaders, and workers. Again, for a communal divide, create a sense of panic and also send shivers down the spine in the Indian mindset. So this is the 5-point strategy which the ISI has. And the sleeper cells I mentioned, there were about 40 in Kashmir. And with my experience, I can tell you, there are immensely more right across. There is no dearth of people who are prepared to give their support to an immoral, illegitimate, and an anti-national activity. We have people, you must have seen on the news channel, you must have seen that there is orchestrated opposition to something that promotes national welfare. A selected group of people, a selected people. There are selected people who will criticize the UAPA. My only request is, sir, please have a subcommittee and compare the America's Patriot Act and compare the UAPA. UAPA is kindergarten stuff in front of the Patriots Act of the USA, sir. Look what happened in the Guantanamo Bay Detention Center of the USA. We respect human rights. And our records of human rights and our level of commitment to them is second to none in the world, and we don't have to be taught by the Amnesty International or anybody what to do about ourselves. But yes, there is a Tukde gang. There is a Sharzil Imam, and there's not a question of one Sharzil. I could go on, and I'll give you a personal example. You may recall, sir, that there were 3 blasts in Uttar Pradesh, in the collectorate, in the courts, Lucknow, Faizabad, and Varanasi. Indian Mujahideen was accounted for, and the operatives were all arrested by the UP Special Task Force and the UP ATS. And one of them, Khalid Mujahid, much after my retirement, died due to a heat stroke in Barabanki. I was in Rishikesh delivering a lecture in the Ramakrishna Mission. And lo and behold, a murder case was registered against me, Brijlal, who's a member of parliament now, the then DG Civil Defense, and 42 members of the Special Task Force, the commandos, all the officers who were responsible for the arrest and the interrogation of that terrorist. They then almost went ahead, wanted to withdraw the cases of terrorism against them. And when the High Court stepped down and said, why are you just withdrawing the cases? You please consider them awarding the Padma Vibhushan also. You are not going to decide whether we are going to decide. You mean the judiciary is going to decide whether they are terrorists or not. This is a wake-up call yet again. There are people who will go to absurd lengths to placate the terrorists and those who are anti-national elements. And Khalid Mujahid, again, they were convicted. Khalid Mujahid died, of course, but the others were convicted by the lower court. During the course of the investigation, General Singh, sir, there is an outfit in Lucknow, all of you Lucknow. They sat on a dharna opposite the GPO for 90 days. And who are these people? I'm not naming that outfit. It is there on the net, and there are certain things that I've disclosed only when there's a one-to-one or a closed-door interaction. That outfit agitated for 90 days for the arrest of Brijlal, my colleague, me, and all the 42 commandos of the STF and the officers. And who were these people? These people were also instrumental and were the backbone of anti-CA agitations. They were arrested then. Their properties were confiscated and attached by the government. So you please see, and the same Candle March gang that operates in Delhi also operates in Lucknow. The same Candle March Award Wapsi gang that operates in these two places would operate against you, me, and against whatever is beneficial to the nation. Under these circumstances, sir, a befitting reply will have to be diplomatic. It has to be on the economic front. It has to be on the financial front. If need be, it is for the policy decisions to make. भय बिन होए न प्रीति, और गमले में उगने वाले जब बरगद का मुकाबला करें, तो they are inviting surgical strikes and deterrence. There is one thing that I have understood, sir, and I have interrogated any number of ISI agents. And the first thing is that the bravado dies down after about 3 or 4 days of interrogation. All the bravado dies down after 3 or 4 days. And I would ask him, what about your commitment to meet the 72 beautiful houris waiting for you in the other world? What about that? Uncle ji, is baar chhod dijiye, main kasam khata hu, main is taraf dekhunga bhi. So these are things that all experts who are working on de-radicalization, who are working on course correction, they need to reinforce de-radicalization, work on the sleeper cells. Banning of CB, Student Islamic Movement of India, was no joke. We worked for 5 years, and effort after effort, our efforts were rewarded after 5 years of hard work and documentation. But they metamorphosed into something like Indian Mujahideen. Indian Mujahideen also, the back was broken. Then you have the PFI. And there are multiple things that they reincarnate, and the avatars are very different. But yes, a lot of spade work, a lot of documentation, a lot of intelligence gathering will be the answer. And yes, the consequences will be far-reaching if we allow and do not take the opportunity that are with us today, advanced intelligence, mutual coordination, and then giving a befitting reply. With your permission, sir, I would like to tell you that a small bibliography for the Haqqani Network. This is a good book for those who are interested. Yahid Brown and Don Rassler. The IS of Pakistan is a must read for all of us, by Hein J. Kesselring. And military income, because Aisha Siddiqa is a Pakistani writer, and she has explained how the Pakistani is now into more of economics than into armaments and warfare. They are manufacturing cement, pizzas, and sanitary material, etc. So be it. But these are one thing that will be a window to our neighbors, the armed forces, and the evil nexus between Taliban, China, and Pakistan. Thank you so much, Sir General Singh, for your very kind permission. And thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for a very, very short but very incisive talk. Are we sitting on a volcano? Is the big question which we have to ask, which is ready to become active, and unless we take some urgent actions towards this threat, I think we will be in some deep trouble. As I always keep saying, internal security is an area which is ideally suited for gray zone war, and both Pakistan and China are past masters in gray zone war. We will look at this issue during the question and answer session. With that, sir, I now come to the last part of our webinar, which is Pakistan's impact on India due to this exclusivity. And to speak on this matter, we had earlier Mrs. Tara Karta, but unfortunately she has fallen ill, and General Harsha Kakkad, who is, if not equal, I would say better than her to speak on this issue of the webinar. General Kakkad is an old colleague and well-known national security and international relations expert. An artillery officer of the 1978 batch, he commanded an RT regiment and RT brigade. He has served in all theaters of operations and terrain. He was also the chief of staff of Bengal area before he hung his uniform. He has been very active in the writers circuit. He has regular columns going in the Statesman, in Daily Excelsior, and all many other leading dailies. If I start recounting, it'll take me a lot of time. He's got a website where you can see all his literary exploits. He's also got a book to his credit, basically compilation of all his articles since he started indulging in a literary pursuit after his retirement. To speak to us on the likely approach of Pakistan in the short to the medium term towards India, suggest measures to deal with security challenges posed by Pakistan from such a collusive threat. Over to you, sir. Harsha Kakkar, sir.
Thank you, Dushyant. Thank you, Military Lit Fest, and also thank you, Strive, for having given me a chance to speak. Brigadier Dahiya has covered the background. I would not repeat it. Suffice it to say that Pakistan has been raising the Kashmir bogey based on the UNSC resolution in global forums. Well aware that the Lahore Declaration and Shimla Agreement have made the UNSC resolution ineffective. India's rising global power status has left Pakistan alone in international forums, as India insists that Kashmir is a bilateral issue. What infuriates Pak even more is India refuses to acknowledge Pak's calls for talks. Now, with that as a backdrop, before I move on, I just need to add one sentence that when we look at the current scenario, we also need to look at the way the present environment exists within Pakistan and in its neighborhood, which is unlikely to change in the near future. The insecurity which is emerging from Afghanistan has severely impacted Pakistan's western borders. They've become unstable. The CPEC is under threat. The increased emergence of attacks by the TTP and the Baluch have made Pak realize that its western borders are of greater importance than its eastern borders with India. It's got immense internal insecurities rising from anger within the country. The TLP, whose agitation is on now, and it's not the first, this is the third or the fourth agitation of the TLP, and is going to regularly be coming into the limelight. The PTM, the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, the rising power of the clerics, religious fundamentalism, extrajudicial arrests and killings in both Balochistan as well as Waziristan has had an impact on the internal instability within Pak. Look at the economy now. It's going through an economic downslide. Its inflation is the highest in South Asia, running at about 9% today. The dollar as of today morning was at 174 plus. This would enhance inflation, rise the costs of imports. There is no IMF loan expected in the near future. Foreign exchange reserves as of this morning was 17.6 billion, just enough for about 2.7 months of imports. To overcome its problems and cater for repayment, this is all that it has. As per reports, Pak needs an infusion of USD 51 billion in the next 2 years. Who's going to fund it? Its worsening relations with the US adds pressure from global bodies like the FATF, World Bank, where talks have failed even for the next set of loan of 1 billion. There are disagreements on the provision of base and overflights. Why is there a disagreement? There's a rift between the polity and the army. The causes are many. The army wants closer ties with the US, including opening air corridors. The polity fears election backlash. Appointment of army officials meant to be issued on 22nd. Today is the 24th. No sign of it, adding on to internal instability. In Pak, no matter who is the PM, the rift between the polity and the army invariably comes in the latter half of the PM's tenure. Benazir faced it. Nawaz faced it. Now it's Imran. No prime minister has completed his full term. Will Imran complete? Or will that now come out with the sale of personal gifts which he received, including the watch, for 1 million? China may be a bosom ally, but very well covered by Brigadier Dahiya. But there is eroding of trust. Gwadar is possibly being dumped for Karachi. The slowing down of CPEC projects. Pakistan has major complaints on unreliable military hardware. the high cost of power based on power projects constructed by China. Negotiations with the Chinese power companies appear to be stalling. Take the latest case of the Dasu hydropower plant, where 9 engineers were killed in a terrorist strike. China has demanded 38 million US dollars as compensation, which implies China wants 73 crores per individual. Today, 28% of Pakistan's debt is owed to China. China has an easy method of adding to Indian concerns, as Brigadier Dahiya had covered: arm Pakistan, provide it with weapons, thus ensure that it can continue challenging India and adding to Indian concerns. When the government took over in Afghanistan, there were big hopes in Pakistan. Its terrorist leaders went as far as going to Jalalabad and meeting the new leader, meeting the Haqqani network heads, hoping for support in Kashmir. The Indian consulates in Afghanistan were supposed to be, as per SM Qureshi and other Pak leaders, were supposed to be supporting anti-Pak terrorist groups. For them, the removal of pro-India lobby with the new government coming in appears to be a benefit. But the fact remains that terrorist attacks have increased in Pakistan since the closure of Indian consulates. So was Pakistan blaming India, correct? Now, what are the benefits that have flown into Pakistan with the change of government in Afghanistan as far as its actions with India are concerned? It would have, if not now, or it will very shortly, move its terrorist bases to eastern Afghanistan. This will be away from the FATF and world body eyes, and Pakistan can then claim that they don't exist on my soil. And when these locations are given to Afghanistan, the bases would just shift to Afghanistan, would ignore. It would relocate its terrorist group leaders into Afghanistan, thereby projecting no control. The US weapons and additional military equipment, which was located in Afghanistan post the Haqqani takeover, I wouldn't call it a Taliban takeover, because the entire government is controlled by the Haqqani network, including night sites, will definitely boost the capabilities of terrorists who are being infiltrated. Pakistan would hire experienced Taliban members. After all, they're unemployed, and as per today's reports, they're being repaid by wheat rather than in cash, which is what is the only thing available now within the Afghan government to pay its fighters. It will even hire IED experts, possibly for employment in Kashmir. Afghanistan may not officially support Pakistan's position, hoping for global recognition, but it would definitely turn a blind eye. The major disadvantage of the current government created in Afghanistan by the Pak DGISI, Hamid, has been that it hasn't had any global recognition. This means that all burden on maintaining Afghanistan is going to add on to Pakistan. Imagine all this coming in terms of financial, in terms of security. It's only going to add on to Pakistan's western borders. What are the options available with Pakistan? Open war? Unlikely. It would prefer the ceasefire continuing because it gives them a safety margin for enhanced deployment on its western front. The ceasefire was a result of the track diplomacy, track 2, track 3, whatever you want to term it. And it was bulldozed by the polity down the throats of the army, basically hoping to commence talks with Pakistan. Nothing has happened because the terms of agreement between the two sides are such that the demands of Pakistan are unacceptable to India and Indian demands on Pakistan are unacceptable to them. Terrorism would not stop, nor would radicalization, as also political support, that is diplomatic support and informational warfare support, something that we see almost daily on social media. The intention would be to keep Kashmir alive in the global eye. It would exploit any Indo-China war for its advantage. An Indo-China stalemate and enhanced deployment along the LAC as it exists today benefits Pakistan because it distracts India. For China, a troubled Kashmir is a benefit as it distracts India. This is one area where the two sides could and are also currently colluding, and there is no two doubts about it. The enhanced internal divide, as covered by my predecessor, Dr. Vikram Singh, there is no doubt that this is again being pushed to a large extent by funds from Pakistan, creating an internal divide, breaking the internal fabric of India, as we've seen in the recent riots that have taken place. Now, let's look at the analysis of the past few months and the way it's going to move forward. Infiltration will continue. The level of trained terrorists are high, as we've seen in the recent Poonch encounters. Reports of Kashmir say that Pak terrorists in the valley exist, though most are in the upper reaches and staying quiet. They would only become active on directions once the current strategy fails. Now, what is the current strategy? The current strategy is to create fear and insecurity of the 90s, leading to an exodus of migration. The moment that begins, which is already started on a small scale, but moment it picks up, this would discredit the current ruling dispensation. And that is exactly what Pakistan is aiming for. The employment of local terrorists ensures that India cannot blame Pakistan. In case of a major attack within the valley, it could lead to religious acrimony in different parts of the country, which again is Pakistan's benefit. As far as the collusion is concerned, we should be very clear that the present scenario in Kashmir is a Pak-China collusion. It's only going to grow with time. And as Indo-China relations, in case they go further downhill with the way Chinese attempts are increasing along the LAC, Pakistan is going to get more and more active, not only within Kashmir, but across India, and in the manner in which Dr. Vikram Singh has stated. The other collusion, very clear, is provision of air bases to China. As also collusion, in case Indo-China relations go further downhill, is going to be in the maritime domain. This will ensure that Indian maritime power remains split. Now, coming to the last part, what are the options for India? The first and the best option that India must do today is end the ceasefire. It must target Pakistan camps and launch pads, which have moved far closer to the LOC. This would send a very clear message to Pakistan that if infiltration does not stop, targeting will increase. And the ceasefire has actually benefited Pakistan much more than us, and therefore there is no need for keeping it going. The threat of change of Indian nuclear options in case of collusion between Pak and China must be made clear. A warning must be given that Pakistan would be hit by every possible resource available within India in case Pakistan continues to collude with China. With this, I'd like to just conclude and state that there is no doubt that the two nations, Pak and China, are working in tandem, exploiting the scenario as far as they can, without officially getting into the public domain or into an open, visible collusion. If we have to deal with them, there are no two doubts that we will have to handle Pakistan firmly. And the one way of handling it firmly is first to break the agreement of the ceasefire, and the rest of it would follow. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for a very, very crisp response to the Pakistani angle as far as our deliberation of today are concerned. I think we are now going to launch into the question answer sessions. Before we get to the question answer sessions, may I request the administrator to kindly unmute General B.K. Sharma, who would like to make some comments, and then we will move ahead with the question answer sessions. Mr. Pankaj, can you unmute General B.K. Sharma?
But it should be with a time limit. It should be a...
Yeah, it will be a short, brief comment, sir.
Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe 5 minutes.
Over to you, Sharma, sir.
Firstly, at the outset, my compliments to Military Literature Festival launched by my close friend, and also to Strive. And let me assure General Ajay Chaturvedi, I have no intention of wasting anybody's time here. All that I want to say is that we have had three brilliant presentations. I would like to focus on three major strategic security issues which may become the focus of our future deliberations and discussions. Though these have come in parts, but they require perhaps a far more insightful analysis. And first is the security of Siliguri corridor, the collusivity in the security of Siliguri corridor. Look at what China has been able to do to stymie our Kaladan project by using a proxy force like Karen Army. Look at the geopolitical situation that has emerged now in Bangladesh, wherein looking at an alternate container corridor for the time being will go on a back burner. Now look at the security of Siliguri corridor per se. Mr. Vikram Singh has very clearly brought out what is happening in Terai region. And I am privy to certain information that the entire funding of Pakistani overtures in Terai region are being done by the Chinese. There are new sleeper cells being created. There are new modules being created, and the border being porous. You will see a flux of these non-state actors and terrorists coming through that. More worrisome is what is happening in eastern Nepal in the area of Elam, Jhalpa, Thaplijang, where Chinese have tremendous influence on the villagers. They have connected a pass from Tiptala. There is a Shigatse Tiptala road. From Tiptala, they have created a motorable road into Ilap Jaffa, which is just opposite Darjeeling. And these Thambovan and Limbovans are very active, who've been die-hard Maoists. And this route can very easily be exploited for whipping up in sort of asymmetric security threats in Siliguri corridor. Also, we should not ignore the potential of revival of GGMM agitation there, which Chinese are quite capable. And in the light of that, we should also see presently the noises which in our country we are creating about these certain targeted killings in Bangladesh do not augur well. You know, there are large number of these enthusiasts who've been calling Bangladesh names and talking about, you know, this desiccation of Bangladesh. I think this doesn't augur well. We cannot afford to have a major Muslim country in our neighborhood going the Pakistani way. And last point that I want to make here, we should not make light of this MOU which has been signed between China and Bhutan on settlement of the boundary issue. It's just a matter of time that Bhutan may have the propensity to disaggregate its border issue from that of India, and that will decide the fate of what you call is the Doklam Plateau, and it has its own strategic implications, particularly with regard to security of Siliguri corridor. Not much has been talked about the collusivity in Ladakh. The way the Chinese have come into Dapsang Belt, it has its own huge strategic implications as far as your access to Siachen Glacier is concerned. And even if we had certain plans in regard to your Gilgit-Baltistan designs. Now there are military officers from Pakistan, which are both in Xinjiang Military Command embedded there and in the Western Theater Command. And be rest assured that it is going to be one plan of collusivity there. Chinese are already connecting the Western Highway with the Karakoram Highway. Pakistanis have created a feasibility study of connecting Karakoram Highway with Afghanistan, and a certain kind of multimodal connectivities are coming across Wakhan corridor into Afghanistan. So you see its own strategic implications in terms of induction, mobilization, strategic force, posturing of forces. And last point that I want to make it is in the asymmetric space, though in passing Brigadier Dahiya and Harsh both have mentioned about the outer space. Pakistanis are creating a large number of Beidou Earth stations in Pakistan. And this will actually, the entire ISR capability of Pakistan will be in the hands of China, and they will be able to see everything. And most worrisome is now these 8 submarines which Pakistanis are giving to, Chinese are giving to Pakistan. As against for about 18 submarines now, and coupled with that about 68 submarines that Chinese have. Look at in the stealth warfare, which way this asymmetric balance is going to go. And let's not actually wish away. If Americans can give nuclear submarines to Australia, what if Chinese are able to lease a nuclear submarine or 2 or 3 nuclear submarines to Pakistan? What is going to happen? And the last is, let's not also look up, ignore or wish away the capabilities of China to build up MIRV capabilities of Pakistan, which will radically alter the strategic balance against India. These are some of the points that I thought I will just flag.
Thank you very much, sir. And I think these were issues which are very important. And in fact, this is the outcome of the collusivity, is what you covered, and we need to be careful. In fact, we need to be proactive on these issues. With that, we will take on the next question, which is from Brigadier V.K. Narayanan. And it says, whenever an important leader from the USA visits our country, there has been security issues in the DMK. However, when President Trump visited in February last year, the problem shifted to Delhi. Why could this not be foreseen by our security planners and preventive action taken? I think Mr. Vikram would be able to elaborate on this particular question. Over to you, sir, if you'd like to respond.
Thank you, sir. Well, I'm privy to certain very sensitive information, and I would not blame the Delhi police at all. The orchestrated manner in which the Delhi police was victimized and targeted both on the electronic media, the print media, and the other so-called NGOs who have a single point agenda. I would say that the advanced intelligence was there. They did make any, but I would say yes. If I were there, I would question why no preventive arrests, why no house-to-house searches to recover weapons, acid, and the fortifications on the rooftops. You do have the drone technology. You could also have the aerial. You had the aerial photographs. Then on those rooftops, but sitting in judgment after the incident is not very appropriate. They did, in fact, go, but I would say to their credit, it was tight rope walking. Any preventive arrest in a large measure or searches from house to house could also have precipitated and created another front, which the Delhi police could ill afford. And I would say, in the balance, I respect their judgment for not in a scale of 1:10. They did, as per my estimate, 4 out of 10. But going up to 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, perhaps could have opened the Pandora's box also.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else who would like to elaborate on this question amongst the panelists? Okay, so then there is a request from General Nitin Gadkari to comment on certain observations which he has on today's webinar. Are you there, General Gadkari?
He's there.
Yeah, may I request him to kindly unmute him?
Okay, one second. Pankaj, please unmute Nitin.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, Nitin.
Yeah, Nitin sir, go ahead.
No, my question was to General Kakkar and others, to the general panel. Every time there is a ceasefire, we end up saying that India loses more than it gains. It doesn't make sense then to ask for a ceasefire. And the second question is, Afghanistan is not going to be stable for very long, as the reports are going around, is to be believed. And it is on the cusp of a civil war. So how much is the truth in the fact that Afghanistan will send its fighters to Kashmir to fight for Pakistan? Don't you think there is a little exaggeration in this whole Afghanistan people coming into Kashmir and fighting? While the scenario in Kashmir is building to a certain level, but not to the extent in which we are fearing. So somebody could comment on that.
Sir, I'll take it on. Regarding your second part first, that's what I said. I said it's unlikely for the Afghan government to be directly involved. Yes, the Taliban fighters are easily available as guns for hire, including the IED experts. they are the ones who are going to be picked up cheaply and then moved in, which is what is most likely. Second, as far as the question about the ceasefire is concerned, normally the ceasefire invariably results in reduced infiltration, and it is basically based with and once you've hit hard. This is possibly the one which flowed from track 2 and track 3. If you remember, after the ceasefire, there was mention of talks coming through between the two sides, with Pak insisting that the basic condition for talks involves re-pushing back Article 370 and 35A, and India saying that terrorism and talks can't go together. But the fact is that the infiltration has not stopped. The situation in the valley is the same. There is, in fact, a large number of terrorists, as per inputs from the valley, which are there from Pak. So if it's not benefiting us and we can't target their launch pads, we can't target the posts that are supporting infiltration, then why should we stick on with it? I think that was my perception, that we need to give it up and we need to get back into the mode it was earlier.
Dushyant, I would like to say a word about it, about the second part, which about Afghanistan issue, he says. My sense is that while it is true that some guns for hire may be available, but more importantly, the guns itself would be available. So therefore, the caches which have been created in last few months, and they'll continue to be created because of this ceasefire. Kashmir, Pakistan will try to make it unstable with the resources which of theirs, that's Jaish and Lashkar-e-Taiba, which are getting released from the western border, and they would be used. So therefore, as far as in either case, Kashmir, they will try, and not only Kashmir, my sense is that they will try to make even Punjab unstable, and in a larger sense, as Mr. Vikram Singh said, that 100 crores and 50 crores which they are spending, even in other parts of the country, they will try to create instability, and that is what their aim is all about. Thank you.
With that, I think since we have already overshot our time, I will take one last question of Mr. Shankar Mahadevan, who was asked Dr. Vikram Singh. It's kind of a suggestion also. Given the intel available on such issues like Himalayan Bank, FATF relevant, has the central government agencies collated such content for use in information war against Pakistan and China? May be useful to develop suitable escalation models for the state police forces through RAW and IB to create content for ADGPI so that international narrative is created and controlled by ADGPI to influence the Western media, similar to how Pakistan and China have infiltrated Western media agencies. Is it possible to increase such content creation from every state to central ADGPI? Thank you. So over to you, Dr. Vikram sir. I think it is a very relevant point. So you couldn't get the question?
No, I got the question, sir. Now I've been unmuted. I would like to respond.
Okay.
A very pertinent question, sir. That is also capacity building of the states. I'm fully aware the government of India, the IB, RAW, and everybody who matters in government of India is fully aware of the nexus between the Habib Bank, the Himalayan Bank, and the Rashtriya Bank. And the states, it would be unusually optimistic to expect that the states could take on the might of Nepal. But yes, they should be privy to the fact what insidious and criminal and anti-national activities they can possibly indulge in, their modus operandi, and how they can penetrate our security system. That is where the fault line is. And therefore, I think there needs to be a greater synergy amongst the states with the central agencies together to give a befitting reply to the ISI and the insidious designs across the border, not only from Nepal, but also from Bangladesh and Pakistan also, sir.
He also spoke about information, this being used as an information tool to target Pakistan and China. So if you could throw some light on that.
Certainly, sir.
Should we indulge in such information being put into the open media, and then, you know?
I think we are very observant and we fight by rules. Of course, we should fight by rules. There's a gentleman's way of conducting affairs even when we are exposed to rogues and failed states. But yes, there is documented evidence on the activities, illegitimate activities that can be very fruitfully used in the FATF documentation, as also against both the countries in exposing them, their nefarious designs, and also as a documentation in international fora like the United Nations also, sir.
Thank you, sir. I think with that, we will like to close today's session because we are already, I think, 15 minutes beyond our time. But it was a very invigorating session with the participation by the participants also. I would like to thank Jan Sharma, Nitin, and Mr. Mahadevan for having shared their views with us. Well, China-Pak collusivity is a given. It's an enduring one. It is higher than the Himalayas, etc. That is always there. But what is important is how is it going to manifest on ground? Now that is a question I think which we need to map it and then take corrective actions against it. Some of them were highlighted by Jal Sharma and which are very relevant, especially the road which is talking from the eastern Bhutan side coming into the Siliguri corridor. I was also in the same appointment which Jal Sharma held for 2 years, I think, and I simply slipped into that appointment later on. And this road has always been on the map of the Eastern Command, and I'm sure, sir, the Eastern Command would be live to this situation, and also the internal security mechanism of West Bengal would be taking care of it. The FISCN was already being mapped in a very great detail when I took over that appointment. Besides that, sir, the other issues which have highlighted by all the three speakers, I think are relevant, especially Mr. Vikram, sir, your views on the ISI's activities. That was something I think which is really going to scare people, and it needs to into the corridors of power, disruption of their services. If that happens, we should not see an IC 814 happening again in the digital world, as I say. As far as your cyber attacks are concerned, they are already taking place. But our ports have been mapped by the Chinese actors. They have displayed the ability to interrupt our ports, interrupt our power grids. They are not doing it as of now, but they can always activate it whenever they want to. I think these are the areas which we need to focus on. Given the collusivity, conflict is bound to take place. And as Brigadier Dahiya says, earlier we realized that China is our adversary and not a competitor or a cooperator. I think better it will be for us to move ahead in that particular direction. Our laws have to be relooked, as by sir, for let's look at Patriot Act a little more deeply. If it is good, I am not aware of the actual contents of the act, but if it is to benefit the country, why not go ahead? I think we need to create that kind of a intellectual environment and the kind of movement into the strategic community to force the government or to force the people that are in power to revise the Internal Security Act, which we have as of now. As you are aware, even the Armed Forces Act is being actively opposed by most of our internal security experts, so to say. Lesser said than the better on that issue. With that, I would like to, that leaves me to only thank the Military Lift Festival organizers, especially General HK and his team, for collaborating with Strive India. General RP Singh for support, liaison and coordination. Our chairman, General Parmar, for encouraging us to take up such issues. Our vice chairman, Major General Chaturvedi, who is the soul behind this entire exercise of our outreach to the people of UP and the people of the country, to sow the seeds of security consciousness in our youth today, which is there around us. With that, I would finally like to close the webinar's deliberation and hand over to General Hemant for his concluding remarks.
Thank you, our esteemed panelists, and thank you, our audience. It is a very serious situation. We only take it that we have to be alert and proactive. Before we close down, a word about the next week's sessions. Hegemony has always been there. So we will be discussing a book called Climate of Conquest by Dr. Pratyay Nath of Ashoka University. And there will be a PowerPoint presentation on the cartographics of Lucknow cantonment in the early days by Sonal Mittal. And on 31st, we will be discussing Success Through Madness, a conversation with some highly successful veterans. Thank you so much from the side of Military Literature Festival Lucknow and from the side of Strive. It has been a great collaboration listening to all of you.